Throughout the series, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, many important conversations occur. There are conversations that introduce us to the demigod world, conversations between the gods and their children, and conversations surrounding the Great Prophecy. For me, there are 5 definitive conversations that stand out as the most important above all, and there's one per book in the series. Today, we will be discussing the conversation between Percy and Annabeth that takes place in The Lightning Thief. In this video, I'm going to explain why it's so important and how it impacted the rest of the series. Before we start, I'd just like to take a moment to promote my Instagram, which I'm trying to use to grow the channel by advertising it on other social media platforms. So be sure to give me a follow on there. Now, let's get started. The very first, utmost important conversation of the entire series takes place in The Lightning Thief, in the chapter titled, "We Take a Zebra to Vegas." There's a whole scene in this chapter that is dedicated strictly to this conversation, and it takes place directly after Percy, Annabeth, and Grover head to a water park in Denver, Colorado to retrieve Ares' shield. And while there, we see Annabeth is deathly afraid of spiders due to Athena's rivalry with Arachne. And the scene that takes place after this conversation is a dream sequence in which Percy sees the late Thalia Grace, whose sacrifice protects the very place that Percy truly considers home. But here, during this conversation, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover are hitching a ride in a shipping truck filled with abused zoo creatures. This scene stands out because Percy has just saved Annabeth from Hephaestus' mechanical spiders, as she'd had a panic attack upon catching sight of them. Annabeth thanks Percy for being so calm during that encounter, explaining that Arachne's children, the spiders, always find Athena's children and go out of their way to terrorize them. It displays that Annabeth is growing to trust him, and here she begins to open up, letting her walls down and showing Percy the side of her that is most vulnerable. It's halfway through the story, and they've already been through so much, both together and separately. And it's this conversation that highlights a lot of Annabeth's backstory, pulls back the curtains, and it allows us and Percy to truly get to know her and to learn about Grover's place within all of it. Percy puts 2 and 2 together that Grover had been the satyr designated to protecting Thalia Grace, the daughter of Zeus, who got turned into the pine tree by her father, which put a protective barrier around the campgrounds. Annabeth explains that she, Thalia, and Luke Castellan at the time had been on the run together, with Annabeth being nothing short of a toddler at just the tender age of 7, and Thalia had been 12 years old. Annabeth explains to Percy that her mother, Athena, had guided her toward help, and she ran into Luke and Thalia, and that for a few months, it had been just the 3 of them until Grover found them. Grover tells Percy that his only task was to protect Thalia, nobody else. Grover proceeds to explain that he got scared and took too many wrong turns, only for Annabeth to tell him, "Stop it, no one blames you. Thalia didn't blame you." Even as Grover continues pitying himself, Annabeth and Percy try to bolster his spirits. Percy assures Grover that he has the biggest heart of any satyr ever, and that it's no coincidence he found both Percy and Thalia. When Grover falls asleep, Annabeth tells Percy that what he'd said to Grover was really nice, and Percy makes note of the pine tree bead around Annabeth's camp necklace, and he realizes that that bead represents the year Thalia sacrificed herself outside the property line of camp. And Annabeth proceeds to tell him stories about the various beads around her necklace, which even includes a centaur in a prom dress. And Percy asks her about the college ring that she keeps attached to it, asking if it is Annabeth's dad's. At first, Annabeth is defensive of this, insisting to Percy that it's none of his business, still very guarded due to conversations about her father being such a sore spot. But her walls just as quickly crumble, and she admits it. But Percy is quick to say that Annabeth doesn't need to tell him if she doesn't want to. But this only encourages Annabeth further to open up to him and let him in, her voice shaking, signifying that she's near tears as she begins. She explains that the college ring is her father's main keepsake from Athena, who had helped him get through his doctoral program at Harvard, and said that he wanted his daughter to have it. He apologized to her about not being the most accepting of her being a demigoddess, and he asked her at one point to come back home and live with him, Annabeth's stepmom and her stepbrothers. And Annabeth explains that she believed it, and that she felt stupid believing it, because monsters kept coming to attack her and her family, which led to more arguments and Annabeth running away from home once more. And when Percy asks whether she'll try living with her dad again, Annabeth tells him, "Please, I'm not into self-inflicted pain," and that her father has made his choice about who he wants to live with, showing how unloved and neglected Annabeth feels despite being adored and cherished by Athena. Percy proceeds to ask Annabeth that if they don't find Zeus's master bolt, would it lead to a second Trojan War? And would Athena and Poseidon be fighting against one another again? Annabeth proceeds to tell him, "I don't know what my mom will do. I just know I'll fight next to you." And when Percy asks her why, Annabeth says, "Because you're my friend, seaweed brain. Any more stupid questions?" This final line in this conversation is so important because it shows that Annabeth has grown to truly think of Percy as her friend. And years later in The Mark of Athena, Annabeth explains that this was the moment she fell in love with Percy for the first time. So when she says that he is her friend, she truly means that she is secretly hoping for something more. This shifts Percy and Annabeth's friendship, and their blossoming friendship gives Percy the strength he needs to fight Ares at the end of the novel, showing how much stronger he and Annabeth are when they're right beside each other, and how well they complement one another. This also convinces Annabeth to give living with her father one more chance at the end of the book. It shows how deeply she and Percy have grown to care about each other, and their friendship, the love that they have for one another, is part of what helps Percy mature a great deal. And it shows how hard he's willing to fight for her, and how hard she's willing to fight for him. And that's why I think this is by far the most important conversation in The Lightning Thief, because it helps establish so much, some of which I will save for future video ideas. And I hope and pray that the Percy Jackson television show makes sure to highlight this important conversation, because if they're truly serious about developing Percy as a character, this needs to be there. Thank you so much for watching. If you're brand new, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Also be sure to click on that bell for notifications so you never miss a DC Marvel Girl video. God bless, happy viewing, and have a nice day.